Welcome to the 7th Annual American Theatre Wing Seminar on Working in the Theatre. This series is coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, which is right smack in the heart of Times Square on 42nd Street in the Theatre District. The seminars are part of the Wing's all-year-round program, and perhaps the Wing is best identified with the Tony Awards. We do have a program that goes on all during the year. One of them are the seminars which you are seeing now. The other is a program that brings Broadway and off-Broadway shows into hospitals. We also sponsor theater for young children in the public schools under a program called the Saturday Theater for Children. These seminars, which are given to you as a service of the Wing, is an attempt to recreate the Wing's school. At that time, people that came back from the Second World War were able to retool their trade by going into open classrooms where they heard professionals and people who were experts in their field give of their services. The panelists on the seminars today, and as they've been on all the other days, are once more giving of their expertise and their service. It is a contribution to the American Theatre Wing, and we are indeed grateful to all of them for it. This is the third and the last in this series. We started with the performers. Yesterday was the producers, and I think today is perhaps the most important because it is the word. And without today's panelists, we could not have had the first and the second. My name is Isabelle Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theatre Wing, and I would like to thank the people that have made these seminars possible. To Robert Isaacson, who is director of Cumbin, and to Peter Levy, and to Don Pasco. Thank you very much. And to Bill Riley, our program director. And to all the volunteers of the Wing that have helped to put this together, I thank you too. And now I'm going to turn the panel over to Henry Hewes, who is a member of the board of the American Theatre Wing, and Jean Dalrymple, who is also a member of the board. And I think that today's panel is heavily spiced with members of the board of the American Theatre Wing. And Henry will do the introductions with Jean. Thank you very much for being here.
I'll try to give the credits as quickly as possible so that we can get to the discussion. Jean Dalrymple, as you know, is a producer who's produced over 100 shows, and she's also the author of 2 books that are worth your attention, one of which is Careers and Opportunities in the Theater, which is the book that everybody tends to go to when they want to find out how to get started in the theater, and the other is Community Theater Handbook, which deals with producing theater at a semi-professional level, and which is of use not only in community theaters, but if you're working off Broadway, where semi-professionalism is sometimes encountered. On my far right is Myrna Lamb, who is a leading, I better not say this. I'm sorry. Am I not plugged into things? Oh, all right. On my far right is Myrna Lamb, who is, I was going to say she's a leading feminist playwright, but I don't think she'd like that. And anyway, she's the author of 2 musicals that were done at the Public Theater. One was Apple Pie, and the other was Maud Donna. Not Madonna, but M-O-D Donna. And another show that was done at the Interart Theater, or is it the Women's Interart Theater?
It's the Interart Theater, Women's Interart Center, but I prefer Interart Theater.
Interart Theater, Crab Quadrille. Next to Myrna Lamb is David Berry, whose current play, G.R. Point, is playing at the Playhouse with Michael Moriarty playing the lead. It premiered originally at the Phoenix a couple of years ago and was received well at that time and got a couple of nominations for awards. Next to Mr. Berry is Ernest Thompson, the author of On Golden Pond, which is currently running on Broadway, and he is an actor and as well as a playwright. And to the left of Jean is Audrey Wood, the mother of all, I was going to say the mother of all agents, but she's really the mother of all playwrights, because she is the one who held Tennessee Williams' hand in the early days when he needed to have his hand held by her. I don't know. I think nowadays he has other hand holders, doesn't he? Next to Audrey Wood is Phillip Hayes Dean, one of my favorite playwrights. He wrote a play called Freeman, which was done at the American Place some years ago. He wrote a play called Every Night When the Sun Goes Down, which was done at the O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, Connecticut, which is a wild and wonderful play. He wrote a play called Stye of the Blind Pig, which was done by the Negro Ensemble Company, which I was very moved by. And last year he got himself into a lot of hot water, which he likes to be in anyway, with his play Paul Robeson, which was done with James Earl Jones on Broadway, and then when it closed prematurely on Broadway, Joe Papp took it down to the Public Theater.
No, it stayed on Broadway.
No, he
Stayed on Broadway.
But it was Joe Papp's auspices.
Yeah, he moved it to the booth.
I see.
It went into repertoire.
Well, that's right.
And color girls.
But to my far left is Jay Harris, who is a lawyer, a member of the firm of which Arnold Weisberger is the head. Who is the other partner in that?
Me.
Oh, you're. He's a senior partner in Weisberger and Harris. But more pertinent to this discussion, he is the author of a retrospective guide a retrospective of TV Guide, and he's producing a television show based on that book. I think we might begin today by each of you talking a little bit about your how you went about getting either your current project, like in the case of On Golden Pond or GR Point, or your most recent project, or an upcoming project on the boards, because the people here are a lot of people here who are playwrights who really don't know where to go with their scripts, with their wonderful scripts. And I'm sure that it's not too long ago that some of you didn't know where to go with your wonderful scripts, and you perhaps through hearing how you persisted to success, that would be helpful to them. So maybe you could say something, Myrna, and we can start around the
I'll try to do it very fast and as comprehensively as possible. I wrote my first play a long time ago. My first professional play was done with the New Feminist Repertory Theater, now defunct, of course. And following that, I called Joe Papp on the telephone many times. At that time, he was less busy than he is today, so you'll have to call more often. What I did is I called perhaps 16, 17 times, got Gail Merrifield, and was given an appointment, and that was Madonna. Following that, I did I don't know whether I submitted a script or someone from Interart Theater, which is open to submission of scripts, particularly from women, but also from men. And my plays have been picked up in other ways by other people. I cannot thank the agent I had, and I will not. And recently, I do music theater, which is the most self-destructive form of theater that any writer can do. Nevertheless, I do it. And what I found is there is a performing arts department at Macmillan's who sign you to a publishing contract. They're very interested in something I'm working on now. And they put you together with producers and possible out-of-town tryout people and so forth, and I think that seems like a very good deal for me. I think Joe Papp is still open to me as well as to others. People like the Interart Theater, the off-Broadway people are always looking for scripts, I'm sure. And I don't know about Broadway producers, but I'm about to learn as well as you.
David?
Well, G.R. Point is my first play, but I did have a certain advantage going into the process, which was that I had spent 3 years working at the O'Neill Theater Center as an arts administrator. So I had sat on the business side of the desk and was familiar with things like contracts. So along the way, I've spared myself some agony by rejecting certain contracts that were offered to me, which would have sort of enlisted me to somebody else's cause for half the rest of my writing life. So I avoided those traps, but I think you all would do so those of you who are interested in writing, do yourselves a service to inform yourselves as much as possible about what all those other people who are not, quote, artists, end of quote, do in this business, because I don't think that they are necessarily always serving your best interest as the writer. In my case, I just persisted with G.R. Point against an environment which decided it didn't want to hear much about Vietnam. And I finished an early version of the script in 1975, and I sent it off to a half a dozen friends in the theater. A couple of playwrights and a couple of directors, and Miss Wood, among others. And Miss Wood graciously gave me about 20 minutes in her office and told me that my title was too literary and that she regretted that my play was probably not commercial. And in 1975, she was, I think, correct.
Can you translate the title for the audience?
Oh, the G.R. Point
Yeah.
title? G.R. Point stands for Graves Registration Point, which is a military term for a body collection, mini morgue sort of thing. But anyway, Miss Wood was right in 1975, and I went back to Rhode Island very depressed and then furiously rewrote my script a little bit later and submitted it to the O'Neill Center, which is one of, I think, a principal outlet for new writers now. And it all lay fallow for a while after a good production there. And I had offers of lots of workshop productions, and I kept saying no. I think you also have to be able to say no and not leap at the first opportunity. I didn't need another workshop production of my play. I felt I wanted something a little larger than that so I could learn more from the experience. Through a series of coincidences, I did a reading of the play for Joe Papp, and one of the people from the Phoenix Theater was there at the reading and said, if Mr. Papp passes on it, we'll take it, which is how it got done at the Phoenix for a limited run. And it was well received, and then nothing happened all over again for a while, until one of the actors in my original company decided that the play was worth a shot commercially. And then we've spent the last year and a half, all of us together, trying to get it to this point. Now, I don't know what value there may be for you in that journey, but that's how this one happened.
Who was the actor?
Donald Warfield.
Can you tell us a little bit about how someone goes about submitting a play to be done at the O'Neill, what your chances are of being selected as one of their plays, and what the positive and negative aspects are of having your play done at the O'Neill?
Well, I think most of the aspects are positive. There's a submission deadline at the O'Neill, which used to be December 31st, which is the deadline for the following summer's Playwrights Conference. If you do submit, you'll probably be these days one of maybe 800 or 900 submissions, out of which 12 or 16 plays are chosen, although they now have developed a television script wing, so you can double your chances with 2 different scripts. So the odds are rather high. There's a readers panel. I don't know how many people are involved, but each of those readers probably reads 60 or 70 scripts minimum. They come up with their first choices. Eventually, those are all pooled, and the panel reads I think they read everybody's first choices. Ideally, I guess that's the way it works. So the odds are rather high in getting through the screening process, but if you do and you get to the O'Neill, what you experience is an intensive rehearsal period of no more than 4 days work on your script, and 2 staged readings in front of a paying audience. The Playwrights Conference exists to serve you, the writer, and in my experience, it does that very well.
There's a discussion the following morning.
Yes, the following morning your play is critiqued by members of the conference, the conference personnel, actors and directors and designers and members of the public who want to show up at 9 o'clock in the morning for it. And you have the value of being in residence for a month, during which time you can continue to work on your play and continue to talk to people about it. I think it's an incredible opportunity to come away with an awful lot of information, not just about your own script, but about how other people in the theater work. It all happens so fast that you have to be very awake. And if you are awake, you'll learn an enormous amount about the process, yours and others, in a month's time.
And almost every play that's been done at the O'Neill has gone on to be done somewhere else after that.
I don't know if almost every play. I don't think that's true, but a number have. The O'Neill tries very hard not to be a shopping market.
I don't mean Broadway, but I mean sometimes in the college somewhere. Or in
Oh, yes, there's a whole second step program. Sometimes you can get your play produced in I think the second step process is basically a non-profit circuit. But it does get your work seen by a lot of people who do float through the O'Neill, for want of a better word, shopping.
Ernest?
Well, my approach is a little different. I got a gun, 44 caliber pistol. I went into the producer's office and held it to his head. Actually, On Golden Pond is not my first play, and I've been through the process a little bit. I've also been an actor for 8 years, so I've dealt with turkeys for a lot of that time.
Other people's turkeys.
I was really referring to producer-type turkeys, and people like that. I knew the frustrations. I see a producer scowling at me from the audience. But, it's very, very difficult and frustrating because of the obvious elements that enter into it. Because I'd been through the process with other plays that had been submitted to all the theaters in the country and been faced with rejections, I think I was at the total point of being jaded and ready for anything, which I think is a mistake, and I think that's sort of what David was just talking about. But I happened to also be very, very lucky, and my play On Golden Pond fell into the hands of an agent who had had a play done last year at the Hudson Guild Theater. And as I'm sure you all know, the Hudson Guild Theater, by reputation and record, is a very successful and enterprising establishment. And they happened to be looking for a play to open their season with, and happened to choose my play. However, I don't mean to minimize the importance of the Hudson Guild Theater, but that's not to say that every play now has to be submitted to the Hudson Guild Theater, because 3 years ago the Hudson Guild Theater was like any of the other 160 off-Broadway theaters in New York, looking for a Da or another play that would get importance and retrospectively give the theater importance. It happens that at the Hudson Guild, at the moment that I came there with my play, the intensity and excitement and enthusiasm about doing new plays was very high. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Hudson Guild Theater has become like a tryout house, and I think that can be very negative as well as being positive. I mean, obviously, we'd all like to have plays go on to Broadway and make us rich and famous, but there's a certain amount of pressure which I think is destructive, especially if it's a first play or the first effort for a play.
You think that Craig Anderson feels that if a play doesn't go on to Broadway that it's been sort of a failure? Or do you think that he's kept his feeling that I'm going to do my play here for these people, and if it's good, that's fine, and if anything happens to it?
I'm really not sure what goes on in Craig Anderson's head. The theater next year will be taken over by someone else as Craig is leaving. I think that the nature of the business sometimes mutates people's best intentions into that kind of thinking. It's very exciting to have the critics from the major papers come straggling into your theater to see your first play.
We never straggle.
Some of them straggle. But that's not always the reason for doing it, and I think that if a critic comes and gives a bad review, then it quickly negates something that didn't start out to be put on that kind of level. In my experience, I've been very fortunate in that my play went immediately from the Hudson Guild Theater to being picked up by some Broadway producers who took it on a tour out of town to the Wilmington Playhouse and to the Kennedy Center in Washington, and then on to Broadway to the New Apollo Theater. In that shuffle, I think I lost a few of the steps along the way that I might have learned from and appreciated going through. I don't want to give it back, but on the other hand, I think that getting a play on in front of a little tiny audience in a little tiny theater for a beginning playwright can be as important as getting a play on in a theater that seats 1,200 and grosses $126,000 a week.
Do you feel that the new playwright needs to be, in some sense, protected from a kind of review that the critics tend to give a Broadway play, the kind of harsh standards they may set for it?
Well, I remember when I was in college, I went to college in Washington, D.C., and there are 5 major colleges there, and occasionally the critics or have a slow week or something, and they'll come to the colleges and they'll review productions, and the review will appear in the paper with the same space and the same lettering as a review of something at the Kennedy Center or at Arena, and I think that the proportions got a little confused. If an actor read about himself, a student actor read about himself in the Washington Post for doing a play at American University or University of Maryland, and he was destroyed by the critic because his performance in, say, a college production of Man of La Mancha didn't match Jose Ferrar's performance in the traveling version that was at the National. It could be very destructive to that actor, and I don't think that there should be levels of criticism, but I think that critics sometimes forget to make allowances or forget to say, here's a new writer, and this is not the 19th play, and the level of professionalism may not be as it will be eventually, but here's someone who should be watched, and the play is worth seeing because of that. And
a nourishing review, and also something I think the critic can do is to write honestly about the play and place it exactly where it belongs and at the level it belongs, and state that on that level that it has certain modest virtues, and perhaps if there is a suggestion in the play that the playwright is particularly talented in one aspect of his work, like writing characters or his dialogue, whatever it is, to mention that this is he seems to have an exceptional talent for dialogue, and then out of that the playwright can grow, but nobody's going to read that review and say, well, that's a play we must immediately rush to the Kennedy Center.
Right. I think you're stepping over into something about critics. I mean, a critic can either be supportive and helpful and positive for the theater or not. And as you well know, there are both kinds. And I think that the best critics are those that are friendly to the theater and support it and encourage.
I think there are more of those today than there used to be, don't you?
I can't speak about what there used to be, but when I first came to New York 8 years ago, Clive Barnes was the critic for the New York Times, and at one point there were 10 plays playing on Broadway. Now there are 33, and I really think it's because of a more positive, enthusiastic feeling.
That's what I mean. They're more helpful today than they used to be.
Yes, I think that may be true.
Audrey, there's been kind of an undertone of suggestion here that agents are a pitfall, and I would wonder if you would separate those agents who might be dangerous from agents like yourself.
Well, I don't represent a pitfall, and as you all know, I'm sure, after Henry's speech, I've been doing this for thousands of years. And I must say to you that I think you're all very fortunate to have been born whenever you were born, because I think at this period in America, there are more ways to help playwrights than ever in my lifetime. And I think the many regional theaters, I think off-Broadway, off-Broadway, when I look back to many years ago, we had none of this. And I remember that the first grant, in my knowledge, was given through the Dramatists Guild in about 1938 or 39, and it was $1,500, as I remember. And I remember the Tennessee Williams got one. And that was big stuff then. And now when you think of all the foundations who are interested in writers, the O'Neill, which in my opinion is one of the most important things in the American theater. And I think the point that David didn't quite make is that the O'Neill has been trying to arrange so-called second step productions. And in other words, if something happens there, it can, they themselves try, as I remember, David, to get other productions of plays they believe should go on, right? And this is all very, very fortunate. Again, I must say the obvious thing to you, it is not an easy way to earn a living. And you have to have, I think, not only ability, but I think you have to have great stamina, and you have to have a great desire to be a playwright. Otherwise, I mean, if this is a minor interest in your life, forget it. Just do something else with your life, because this is a way of life that can take a great deal of time, and in the end, you know, you may not pull it off. So I think you have to be deeply in love with the craft, and if it works, fine. Also, I think, I know that you won't like this, but I find it's very helpful to beginning playwrights if they have something else they can do at some part of the day to perhaps earn some money. And I would suggest, again, ideally, I know it sounds dull as hell, you should, you know, learn stenography or learn to take some form of that, or typing. But just to sit at home alone when you don't have any money is very dangerous, I think. But again, nobody can ever tell how long this is going to take. Again, to go back to Williams, we started working, I think, at 38. And the first play he ever wrote was Battle of Angels, and that was 1940. And speaking of critics, I think Battle of Angels got the worst notices of any play I have ever worked on.
This was in Boston?
Boston. And I think, I've always said, and Williams knows this, that if anybody had asked me the opening night of that play at Boston what I was doing there, I don't know that I could have said I represent this playwright. Because everything went wrong. It was chaotic. As maybe you've read, even at the end of this play, there was a fire off stage. Intentionally, I mean, again, in terms of the play. However, the fumes from this off-stage fire came into the audience, and these poor little Theatre Guild ladies, subscribers for many years, went huffing and puffing off the aisle. You couldn't imagine more things going wrong. Then that was 40, and the Glass Menagerie was 45, and Streetcar was 47. Now that's a long pull between 1940 and 1945. But I must say about this man that he persevered. He did other things. He took jobs.
He was an usher, wasn't he, at the Warners?
Yes, he was usher at the Strand Theatre for a while, I think. He also, not ever seeing too well, he drove a truck at one period, which used to frighten me a bit. But again, I must say to you that this is one way that could help you by having something else to do. And again, in terms of agents, it's a very close relationship if it's good, and if it's not good, you shouldn't be there, and the agent shouldn't be with you. And therefore, ideally, if you can find the person that you can talk to and who understands what you're saying, this is very, very important. And I honestly think, again, that New York has many, many experienced people. You also have the Dramatists Guild, who are very helpful, and the contract itself does everything in the world to protect you. On the other hand, I honestly think you need somebody representing you to take care of the detail of arriving at a drama scale contract.
Is there, do you insist, or do agents in general insist upon a lifetime contract with,
No,
the,
of course
with the agent? What is the minimum time that you can get a good agent? What is the minimum time that I would have to commit myself to you or to get you
Well,
from my agent?
there are all kinds of guilds, Henry. You haven't been around lately, darling. You can't sign an author for more than 2 years, I believe. Sometimes authors insist on 1 year, but a 2-year, and then it can be renewed. But this goes to the Screen Writers Guild and whatnot.
Well, last year, Al Inurato complained that he was signed to a 5-year contract, which gave the agent the authority to allow a production of a play that he didn't want produced to some 3 or 4 years later.
I don't know who the agent was, but I can't believe it was a reputable person. Really, I can't. I really can't.
I think she was.
Anyway, no agent has any authority to license a play without the consent of the playwright.
That's right.
It might have been a situation where the agent was a stock and amateur booking organization like Samuel French or Dramatist Play Service, in which they do have the authority to license plays.
They wouldn't do that unless they had a contract.
And then there'd be a contract, and that might very well be a 5-year contract for which he was paid. I mean, this is not the same situation as a play agent. They're not play agents.
I must say also that writers have a way of blaming agents when something goes wrong. And I understand that too.
Philip, on that happy note, do you want to state how your particular problems in getting started and also perhaps your recent problems with Paul Robeson?
Well, you know, I'm one of those playwrights. It just so happened. The first play I wrote was called The Owl Killer, and I happened to give it to Diana Sands. The next thing I knew, they were doing it in a Harlem workshop. Then The Sty of the Blind Pig I gave to Francis Foster to read, and we did a reading of it. And when I came back to town, the NEC was going to do it. So I never had that problem. I think if I had anything to say to playwrights, I would simply say learn how to write, which I think is very important, that you absolutely know what you are doing. I do not agree with workshops primarily. I think workshops are beginning to destroy writers, playwrights particularly. And the word process, whenever you hear it, run. Because what it means generally is that you're going to be conned into doing what the director and the actors want you to do with your play. Now, if you just want to get your play on, that's fine. If you have any kind of personal integrity, you're going to have to watch out for the parasites, of which the theater is full of, you see. The minute they get the play, you become a child that has to be saved from himself. And all of these people who run around, who believe that they know so much about what is commercial, all of them have produced nothing but hits on Broadway. You know, you can see how many hits are on Broadway. So you have to watch out for that. I can't think of any playwrights conference or any workshop that is supposedly helping playwrights that has at its head a playwright. It's generally a director. And the director takes over the play and begins to instruct you as to how you should rewrite that play. I think playwrights must begin to put their foot down on this. And I think a lot of young playwrights are damaged because of this. I mean, there are still cases going on now where playwrights have been locked out of the rehearsal, which no playwright should accept that kind of thing. And I think people should be taken to court or whatever means necessary. I've often thought of getting a gun myself.
Me too.
You know, but I think that this is what happens. And if you're not strong, and if you're just so determined to get your play on, you can get into a great deal of trouble by allowing them to take over your play. However, on the other hand, I think you should learn how to write a play. And I think that becomes very, very important for yourself, that you know exactly what you are doing. I'm not saying there are not going to be little problems, but whereby people say to you, let's change this ending because this isn't commercial. We know what the audience is buying. This is simply not true.
Well, can't a workshop help you see a play on its feet and see where see what changes when you put it in an actor's hands as opposed to reading it off the printed page?
Because what has happened is that playwrights are forced to bend the play to the actor. The actor should bend himself to the play. And that's true of the director, too.
Jay, do you want to say something about?
Well, I'm not a playwright, and I suppose my relevance on the panel is that I'm a lawyer and I do represent playwrights. I also represent producers and directors. And one of the things that really hasn't been discussed yet is, I assume a lot of the audience is, a lot of you are playwrights, and you would like to get to the position to argue with the director, to argue with the actor, to fight over a contract, but the question is, how do you get to that position? How do you go from having a play that you've written to having it seen by someone, to having it produced somewhere, to ultimately maybe getting it on Broadway? And there are ways to go about it, and there is no one way. And the one thing that I would say would be that that you have to believe in your play. You have to believe that it is worthy of being read and worthy of being seen and worthy of being produced, so that you're not timid about showing it to just about anybody that can help you get that accomplished. The Dramatists Guild in New York has complete lists of all the off-Broadway theaters in New York, all of the regional theaters, all of the conditions under which those theaters will entertain unsolicited manuscripts, and many, many of them will read your unsolicited manuscript. The Guild has lists of agents, and if you have a play, just send you a play to one agent after another. Agents are overrun with plays to read. Theaters have hundreds of plays to read. It takes a long time. It's a very slow process. It requires an enormous amount of patience. But if your play has merit, I think that an agent will eventually get back to you and say, I'll try to do something for you, or a theater will contact you and say, I've read your play, I want to produce your play in regional theater or off-Broadway. Once you get some attention, once you get a credit, once you've had it produced and you can see your work, you can advance from there. There are theaters, by the way, that right outside of New York, for example, the Path Playhouse is run by a playwright. And he is a producer and director. And he is, in fact, a playwright. And all of the plays that are produced in Huntington at Path Playhouse are original plays. They do nothing but original plays. Some of them have come into New York. The standard for doing a play there is not whether it will come into New York, but whether they want to do it. So there are avenues, and you just have to keep being persistent and insisting that people read your play and have lots of copies run off. It's an investment of only a few $100s. And just keep sending them around. It is. You can get a couple of hundred copies of your play for $300 or $400.
You speak of only a few $100s. I remember when David Mamet came to town with his first play, and he came over to my office and talked to me, and he said, I have to go and get one more Xerox copy, and I'm looking for a place that will do it more cheaply than the other place. And here's a playwright who already had success in Chicago, and was represented by William Morris and so on. But just the cost of one more script that he needed was giving him a problem. Oh, wow. Now, when you talk about sending out 100 scripts, this is an investment that is quite difficult for most playwrights who don't have a large income.
Well, at some point, if you're a playwright, you have to make a cash investment in yourself. And if it costs $600 or $700 to get studio duplicating, to run off 200 copies of your play, to have one copy Xeroxed is going to cost an astronomical amount of money for one copy because it's 25 cents a page. But to have 200 copies, it's less than $1,000. Yes, it's a lot of money, but it's an investment that has to be made. You have to have that many copies around, I think.
Well, I don't agree. I think 100 copies of anything is outrageous. That's not the way to work in the theater today.
How many copies would you recommend sending out?
12.
12. Ernest wanted to say something. I'll get back to you. Two.
Well, there we are.
I think it's important to have some copies of your play, but there's an illusion, I think, of going to studio or to a place like studio where the minute your play is typed by a professional typist and is in one of those neat covers and it's embossed in gold, it looks like you've got a great play. And I think that that can be very deceptive. And I know writers who do that immediately, run from their typewriter to a place like Studio. I live on the coast, and people out there love to do it. And they're on every corner. There's one of those places that will print scripts for you. And you don't have to go that far, I don't think. I mean, it's important to have copies of your script, but agents, if that's whom you're submitting your scripts to, are much more forgiving than you might think.
Not necessarily.
Well, some of them are, and some theaters are too. I mean, I'm only cautioning you to not think that you have to spend $500 to have it done in your favorite shade of green.
That's right.
It can be done much more cheaply, and it can be 5 cents a copy.
3 cents.
You're in an expensive neighborhood over there. Because
3 cents a copy at Joe at the public theater.
If you want to give me a quarter a page, I can get it back to you in a few days.
Well, I think Phillip, you don't need to get a lot of copies of plays made. The thing you have to do, if you want to get your play on, you know, you find a director who is in with the theater and give him the play. I wouldn't suggest sending a play to any theater to be read, because some college student, fresh from the university of whatever, who knows exactly when the Globe Theater burned down, the precise date, is going to turn that play down. The best thing to do, I mean, if you want to get your play on, the rest of it, you know, it doesn't matter how many copies you have. But the best thing to do is to hang out at the theater bars until you meet somebody who is a director, you know, and then you give him the play, and he reads, and if he likes it, he'll take it to Joe Papp or Gwen Hanman, who are much more prone to listen to another director about a play than they are. First of all, they are not going to read the play. That's for openers, you know. Most of the people who run these theaters simply do not have time to read plays, and reading plays can be quite boring anyway.
Does the Dramatists Guild have a mimeograph list of theater bars that they can?
Well, you can go to Joe Allen's, or you know, Joe Allen's or Charlie's or any of those places until you get to know these people, and you give them your script, and if they read it and like it, they will take it to Gwen, and Gwen will listen to them, or Joe Papp, or if you get a star, you know, you might meet a star there. I mean, that's kind of the way it's done. You know, and if you want to spend your life sending plays around to agents and that sort of thing, go right ahead.
Well, how did you meet somebody like Frances Foster, for instance?
I knew her.
Yeah.
Knew her for years.
Before she knew you were a playwright, you mean?
Oh, yeah, we came along together, you know. I knew a lot of people because I'd been around. I'd been an actor. I'd been a director.
You worked for Gene one time, didn't you?
Yes, and they tried to fire me, too. Not you. But, you know, I mean, that's the way it's done. Well, you know, the rest of it, you know, we're sitting up here talking about mimeographic scripts. That has nothing to do with anything.
Well, it's wonderful if you have contacts, because if you have contacts and you want to get a play produced, you just send it to your favorite director. Just send your play to Hal
That's
Prince.
right.
Call him up on the phone
That's
and say,
right.
Hal, you want to do my play? You have to know Hal Prince. You have to know Hal Prince, and he has to know you well enough to spend the time to read your play. If you don't know anybody in the business, Hal Prince isn't going to read your play. Some assistant in his office is going to read your play, if you're lucky.
He has some good assistants in his office.
I'm
I
not
think I
suggesting
would
they're
like
not,
to
but
say something that's peculiar to me. I'm a female, and he's right. Contacts are everything. There's no question about it. But I must tell you, the kinds of people that I meet in bars, I don't go to bars very often. I had a contact that was a stage manager, and I'm a Leo, and I'm a playwright. I'm sure the universal factor for playwrights, you know, besides the fact that we're all very good-looking, is that we're very angry, and we have a strong sense of personal injustice. It's all true. It's a lousy way to make a living. It's no way to make a living. I don't understand it, and I'm not even going to try to explain it to you. But what happens in case of people like me is if a director comes along and says, I want you, I lose all critical judgment. I have nothing else to do except follow blindly. I never ask the director's credentials. I don't care. After all, this person has had the consummate good taste to want me. And don't. All I say is, don't choose your lovers that way, friends, and don't choose your directors that way. And if you are a female, it is difficult to find an agent, who will be interested in your point of view, and it is interested also in finding a qualified, experienced, good director. Because we are still the other side of the moon. It is difficult. I'm not making a feminist pitch. I couldn't care less about that. That's not my point. The point is, it is difficult at this moment in time. So when you look for a director, look for someone who has qualifications, even if you have to wait in line.
How do you judge those qualifications? I mean, from a who's who?
Track record. Track record, the kinds of material the director has done, the kind of directing the director has done, and the contact that the director has. That's it. Don't be the director's ticket to Joe Papp, please, because that's what has happened to me.
No, I'd like to back up one bit. How did you come from actor, director, to playwright? Did you go through any process? Did you study, Ernest, Philip, and David? Where did you come from to become a playwright?
Do you want to know that I was an actress at first, and then?
Right. And then did you study?
Study playwriting? Yes, I studied playwriting with Rutgers, the New School for Social Research. But look, I wrote my first play when I was 8 years old. I wrote my second play when I was 11. I directed my own play when I was 12 or 13, and then my life went wrong.
David?
I never studied playwriting. I was a history major in college. I was smitten with acting at about the age of 16 and played with it for the next 10 years or so, off and on, a little commercial acting, a little non-commercial acting, never very good at it. Fascinated by the theater, but I'm beginning to understand now that my fascination with acting had a lot to do with speaking words, that the fascination was the words, not the performing so much. I come from, personally, from a long line of letter writing. There was nothing else that led up to my play. And although I suspect that it's, well, this is a personal bias, and I'll just be very candid about it. I don't think it means a damn thing whether or not you have playwriting training specifically. Now, I don't say that just because that's my experience. I think it is essential that you have theater experience. And while you're beginning your careers as playwrights, you might as well be working in the theater in other capacities while you're making all these wonderful contacts, which, after all, you can only make in New York City, because if you live in Rhode Island like I do, it's too expensive to come into New York to make contacts.
There are no theater bars in Kingston?
No. So I think you should pay. I think you should pay lots of. I mean, we all have to pay lots of dues anyway before anything good happens, and you might as well pay some of those dues in other capacities in the theater. Because one of the most unfortunate things that I ever witnessed at the O'Neill Center, for example, was the raw playwright with his first work or her first work coming in to this assault of professionals, all of whom, as Philip says, and he's absolutely right, it's dangerous for you. Because, and as Myrna says, you respond to the compliment immediately, and to the attention and the notice. And if you haven't already learned how to say no, which most Americans don't learn how to say in school, if you haven't learned how to say no, you can be swept away very easily.
Where should you say no at the O'Neill, for instance? I mean,
well, to your director.
Just tell them no,
for starters, or to an actor who is, just no in general, No, that isn't what I mean. Not no, don't do that, but no, you're not, that's not my intent, whatever the no is. But I'm just repeating myself now. Just pay some other kind of dues in the theater so you can communicate in the language of the other artists that you're going to work with. I think it's very useful as a playwright to know something about acting. And it's really useful to find a director who knows something about acting.
Again, I don't have the ideal background either. I also produced and wrote a play when I was 12 and beat up my co-star and baby sister for not saying the lines properly. And I think that something was programmed then and I've never gotten rid of. But I don't know if you can say that a writer doesn't have to study, because there are things one can learn about structure and exits and entrances and moments. I don't know if you can learn them from books or from a teacher, from another playwright telling you. It's like, walking around saying I didn't use my deodorant today. if you proudly say, I didn't study anywhere, then one person will say, that's obvious, or someone else will say, that's remarkable. I don't think I will either. On the other hand, if you say, someone says to me, where did you go to college? Where did you study? I'll say, I went to American University. And someone might say, oh, incredible, and go and sign up and take 4 years of college at American University, and then come up to me later and say, I spent 4 years at American University, and I don't think they had any playwriting courses. And I say, oh, well, there are no playwriting courses there. That's, I think, coincidental. I mean, if I have a play that's successful on Broadway, or anyone does, then there's that immediate thing of, well, I should do whatever that person did, and then I too can have a play successful on Broadway, which is obviously a lot of crap. My experience was to start as an actor, and I think what David says is very valid. I don't recommend that everyone go out and become an actor because you think it's crazy becoming a playwright. I want to suggest you try acting. But there is an awful lot to learn, and I think that I, as an actor, worked in a variety of plays and television programs and films, and learned an awful lot, mostly by osmosis and by seeing bad things being done. I think one can learn to hear better than one who hasn't participated in a play. If you do a terrible, terrible play or a television script, I think you inevitably start hungering for a line that makes more sense, or two lines that go together, and a scene, and then a whole act, a whole hour of television. Let me tell you the problems I've had. It's really crazy. The most incredible, important thing that I learned from 4 years of college was that I had to read, 11,947 plays, and that cumulative background, I think, is very, very helpful, and that I recommend.
That's right.
That's right.
Well,
Philip, are you going to?
Well, what I meant by study, you can teach yourself, or you can be taught by someone else. There is a process of studying in anything you do. I don't know anybody who walks over to the piano the first day and just starts to play. And this whole question of a playwriting, learning the craft, is a very difficult one, because we have many teachers of acting in New York City, and generally out of that comes your directors also. We don't have that in playwriting. Most playwriting organizations require you to write a play, and then they will fuss with it, or they will critique it. And I don't think you learn that way. I think you have to learn how to write a play. Now, there are several ways. I think most playwrights should go down to Berghoff's. It's very cheap, and take some acting courses. I think you should learn as much as you can about set design. I think that is very important, the use of the space in the play. I think you should learn about other plays. You should read a lot of plays. But I think there's a book called Producing the Play. It's a very old book, and it's very thick.
John Gassman.
Yes, he collected it. I think that's a marvelous book for a playwright, because in it you learn a little bit about casting, a little bit about how the director works, something about set design, and so on, and lights. All of these things are very important.
One thing we have to learn about, Philip, is intermissions, because we're going to take one right now, and you can continue after the intermission, but every playwright has to one of the most important things is to plan your intermission. And now we're going to have one.
To the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theatre. This is our 7th annual seminar, and at this point, I'd like to say that the seminars, which have been done both in the spring and in the fall, are shown over cable television on Channel B. And they're on Tuesdays from 1:30 to 3:30, on Thursdays from 7 to 9 p.m., and Fridays from 1:30 to 3:30. So that if you have cable TV and you are interested in the seminars, you can see the ones that are now going on. These will continue to go through in June, and then again we start at the beginning of the season in September. I'm very, very pleased to welcome you here, and on behalf of the American Theatre Wing and Bill Riley, our program director, I'd like to make a little point. We need volunteers at the wing. We need people to man the telephones, to stuff envelopes, to book shows for hospitals and for schools. The wing, as I've said before, is an all-year-round organization. We send Broadway and off-Broadway shows into hospitals and institutions. We sponsor Saturday Theater for Children, and we have these seminars, which I think are absolutely invaluable. And the panelists on the seminars contribute both their time and their expertise to the wing, and I am very, very grateful to all of them, and to Henry Hewes and to Jean Dalrymple, who act as moderators. Thank you very much for being here. And now, Henry, would you take over and introduce our panel?
Okay, I don't want to delay things because I want to get back to Phillip Hayes Dean, who was talking before the ill-timed intermission. Myrna Lamb, a playwright whose latest work, Crab Quadrille, was done at the Inter-Art
And
Theater.
Olympic Park, which followed it.
And Olympic Park, which is their latest work. David Berry, whose play G.R. Point is being done with Michael Moriarty, currently running at the Playhouse Theater in New York. G.R. Point, as everybody knows, stands for Grave Registration Point. Ernest Thompson, who's on Golden Pond, is now running at the new Apollo Theater. On my left, Jean Dalrymple, with whom I have lived in harmony for 35 seminars. Yesterday I said that we were the Floss and Stan Dworkin of cable TV. But today I asked Jean what the secret of our harmony was, and she said, well, we're lovers, so that she's my TV mistress. Next to her is Audrey Wood, who is don't want to say my TV mother, but she is the dean of agents, and next to her is another dean, Phillip Hayes Dean, whose last Broadway show, Paul Robeson, created quite a controversy last year, and played with James Earl Jones, but it was one of the most memorable, 2 or 3 memorable experiences I had in the theater last year. Jay Harris of the well-known firm of Weisberger and Harris, the theatrical law firm, who is not only a lawyer but the author of a retrospective on TV Guide. And he's getting his feet wet because that's being made into a TV show itself. Talk about incest. I mean, you write a book about TV Guide, and then that's made into a TV show. Anyway.
What kind of show, Henry? That
well,
confounds me.
Well, we'll get to that. But first of all, I want Phillip to finish saying he was citing a number of things, and I think you might re-enumerate them, if you can remember them, that a playwright that are useful to a playwright. And the last one was reading John Gassner's famous book,
Producing
the Play.
Yeah. Oh, let me just say that I don't literally mean that you go hang in bars, in case of that. But I think it's important to have contacts, particularly with directors. Unfortunately, that's true. Because, as I said, they can take your play to these institutions. I also think it's probably easier to start out in the institutional theater, and because there isn't as much risk, and therefore it's a little bit more open, and you can build a track record of the institutional theater. To get back to the other thing, yes, I recommend that book very highly for playwrights, as I recommend going to Berghoff's. Because it's very inexpensive, and you can take some acting courses. And I think there's a tendency, well, not a tendency, but there is in the theater. I know when I came along with Dustin Hoffman and Bobby Duvall. I think there's a wave that you come along with, and that wave sort of swoops in, and you want to be part of that wave. So I think it's important to get into the thick of things. That's what I meant, really, by hanging around in bars, because when you're at Berghoff's or any of these places, schools or what have you, somebody there is going to be successful as a actor or a director. And it's important to know them. I'm not saying that you become great friends or anything, but the more people you know, the more chances you have of getting one of those people to read your work. And therefore, the greater the opportunities to have the play produced.
Yeah. I was talking with Ernest during the intermission about trying to trace back the wave of contacts that led to the production on Golden Pond, and we just got started on it, but it had to do with several people, one of which would pass the play on the other. Perhaps you would just trace the number of people it went through before getting to Craig Anderson now, and how that particular person happened to be sympathetic to even reading your play.
Well, it wasn't easy, but it didn't begin in a bar. I had met another playwright in Los Angeles, socially, I believe, originally.
You mean at somebody's party, or?
I think he came backstage at a play that I was doing, and in our conversation, I happened to say, "I write." A lot of people say that in Los Angeles, by the way. If you run into an actor at the tennis courts, he'll say one of three things when you ask him, "What are you doing now?" One is a pilot. The second is collecting unemployment, and the third is I'm writing. And I think because of that, it's difficult to get credibility if you've been on the other side. But anyway, this playwright friend named James Prideaux, who's a fairly successful playwright, gave me some credibility. And
which theater were you playing in? Mark Taper or one?
It was at the Amundsen Theater.
At the Amundsen, there's a professional production then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And through a series of years, we would have these conversations. I write, let me see something. Our friendship was never that close. But eventually, my experience was to be very shy as a writer. Perhaps that's not true with most of you. I found writing, as opposed to acting, to be such a personal and private thing that to actually come out and give it to someone was the most painful part of the process. But eventually I did show him a play that I had written. He in turn asked if he could show it to a director, who in turn called me and asked if he could take it under option, and then informed me that I would need an agent, which seemed shocking at the time. But because I had a play under option, obviously it was easier for me to go to an agent and say, "Look, I got a play under option. How'd you like to represent me?" And through that and the continuing series of events, I ended up where I am with my agent, who, as I said before, gave the play to the Hudson Guild Theater, where he had a play done last year by another client.
Well, did your work on promoting this play stop at the Hudson Guild, or was there something that happened between the Hudson Guild and the Apollo in which you had to take some action?
The happy thing that happened in between was that we got a good production at the Hudson Guild Theater. As I said before, there happened to be, at that point in time, a wonderful group of people working at the Hudson Guild Theater who were very enthusiastic and positive. And I must say that my experience was nothing but good, in that I was invited and not barred from the set or from the theater, as people have mentioned before. And I was very much included in the process, which sounds funny since it was my play. But what we got out of it was a good production, and because, as I said before, the Hudson Guild Theater has had other plays go on to Broadway, or at least one other. There's a certain amount of attention put on the Hudson Guild now, and so producers did come down and see the play. And
was it bid for by more than one producer? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. And how did you make your selection? Or did Craig make it?
I don't know. I don't know how those things happen. I mean, again, that's education, and this entire last year has been so educational in all of the games that I've had to learn to play. And you know, if I had to do it all again, I'm not sure I would. But one has to learn all of the ins and outs of what to look for in dealing with a producer, as well as track record. I think the man or woman's ability to communicate and to share and to want to listen to what you have to say, and you know, I hate to use words like honesty, but
Go ahead.
You're among friends.
Honestly, there's not much of it around, you know. And I mean, that's true with an agent or with the director. Obviously, I mean, it's what you want to have in any relationship. But believe me, there's not much of it out there. And I was not exactly naive when I jumped into the situation, but it's very, very difficult to determine if it's at a different level than a director coming up to you in a bar and saying, I can make you feel good. If it's a Broadway situation, you know, if you have 3 Broadway producers and they all say, I can take this play to Broadway and I can run it and you know, we'll get a movie and all of that, it becomes very confusing. It's so far from the moment of sitting down with your pencil and writing the play that it's very discouraging on one hand, overwhelming, and strange, if nothing else.
We've talked today a lot about the destructive dangers of a playwright putting himself too completely in the hands of his directors and his producers, and I wondered if perhaps we could get into the question of how much interference or helpful suggestions, as a synonym for interference, a producer or director should feel that he is properly entitled to make to the playwright. Is there are there certain kinds of suggestions that you find valuable and certain kinds that you find destructive? And if so, what are they?
Can I answer?
Yes.
I must say that, in all honesty, I think the present group of producers is the least experienced and knowledgeable I've ever worked with. There are some few men and women who know what they're doing, but we are inundated with people who have never produced a play, who producers I call one-time producers, also rich ladies have come into the theater who know nothing at all, but who are excited and want to produce a play. And this is good for a writer if you have, on the other side, a director who knows what he's doing, and you have a very good general manager. But you can also find yourself in a great deal of trouble. And I lived through this, and I'm amazed how, and if Mr. Harris would like to tell the truth, I think he would agree with me that this is a very awkward time. And I can almost count on one hand, maybe with 6 fingers, producers whom I respect and admire and can trust. It's a lean time, and also you see money. In a curious way, money has become more important than experience, and this is what's wrong. And people dash in, and as you know, if you've been reading the papers, great enterprises, you know, go out of town and close out of town. This has been going on, if you are reading the New York Times, a great deal that's been happening this season. And this is bad for the theater, in my opinion. On the other hand, obviously, we have no control. And the only thing you can hope is that with new producers, you hope that they will get established attorneys who have the background to protect not only the production, but the artistic elements. Now, I don't know whether you agree with me or...
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, now you bring up an interesting point, Audrey, that the inexperienced producer, obviously the playwright would be very foolish to pay much attention to the judgments of the inexperienced producer. But suppose you have a certain degree of confidence in your producer and they have a good track record. Is there, I was interested in the playwrights saying, is there a kind of suggestion that you welcome from these people and a kind that you abhor? And if so, what are they?
I don't welcome any kind because I feel that we should write finished plays. And I think that there are a number of directors around, particularly directors, that no matter if you brought Hamlet in or Streetcar Named Desire and they had never read it, they would want to make what they call their contribution. And what is beginning to happen in the theater is the same thing that happened in Hollywood. The writer has almost no power. The director is looked upon as somehow knowing how it's done. I mean, there are directors who run around saying, I'm the boss. It should be no boss. And another thing I think that we have, a point that has to be made, the play is not the theater. All of the techniques of the theater serve the play. You can take the play out of the theater. In other words, two different theaters can do the same play. It's not a collaborative effort on the part of the director and the playwright. The director is the author of the stage production. He is not the author of the text. And many, many directors seem to feel that they co-author. For example, and some of you young playwrights should be aware of this, in the next go-round between the directors and the Dramatists Guild, the directors now want about 15% of the writer's royalty in perpetuity.
For their contribution.
Yes, and they are beginning to want to call themselves co-authors of the play.
Well, no one is ever going to get it from me, even if it means that I don't have a career in the theater. I just would like to speak briefly to some of this and to talk about what it is that I like to find with people. It's a very curious relationship that you find yourself in a production situation. I'm a firm believer in a very necessary kind of egolessness required on the part of the artists involved in the production. In other words, I believe that once one is into production, what everybody should be saying to each other is yes rather than no. The first response to the stimulus should be yes, not no. Let it in, let it happen, that sort of thing. There is an extraordinary movement in the theater to confer upon directors an illegitimate status of control and power and responsibility. And what you want from a director or a producer, to speak to the matter of what kind of advice should you get, well, first of all, you're going to be in a very vulnerable position. You're vulnerable as soon as you release your play to the first person who reads it. You should be aware of your vulnerability. You should not forget for a moment that you are in a vulnerable state. You have given birth to something. And that's almost literal. And you must not keep your defenses up, because I recommend letting things in, but you must be aware of your vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, ideally, there's a great awakeness. And if you really are awake and you really are listening, you can tell the difference between a false compliment and a true one. You can tell the difference between a good piece of criticism and a useless piece of criticism, not necessarily on the spot. It may take a few days for things to sift out in you and for an experience to be distilled so that you can separate the truth from the falsehood. There's an enormous amount of falsehood going on in this town. There's an awful lot of business done by people who don't know what they're doing. There is an extraordinary amount of pressure on you. You have to be strong. You have to have what Ernest Hemingway once called a fully operating crap detector. And you have to have it, first of all, with your own work. I mean, Miss Wood gave me one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my life about 10 years ago, when I was far away from thinking about even a career in the theater, which was essentially what she said was, when you're ready to come to the marketplace, this was after recommending that I learn to take stenography. She said, you know, when you're ready to come to the marketplace, and by the way, in the midst of all of this, you should never forget for a moment that it is a marketplace, and that you are responsible for the most important product in it. When you're ready to come to the marketplace, bring your best cabbages. And if you have, which I think is partly what Philip is saying, I mean, he's talking about writing finished plays. I don't know, I haven't written a finished one yet, but I know what he means, and I think he's very right on about it. You must have a certain sense of security with that material. If your crap detector has been functioning through your own private process, and you come to a place where you have finished and some time has passed and you feel ready, if you are ready, then you will have the strength to withstand the assault of a lot of idiots who don't know what they're talking about, trying to tell you, after 4.5 years of your living with a play, that it's about something else. And everyone will, not everyone, but a lot of people will try. I mean, I don't know, I'm just talking about being awake. If you're awake and your antennae are up, you have no one to blame but yourself for the bed that you lie in. You know, it's fine to have contacts and connections and people who are going to do something for you, but if you're not willing to do it for yourself, then you will be trampled by a herd of untalented people.
And yet, in the theater, as opposed to film or television, the playwright has far more power than in any other medium. If you're a television writer, if you're a film writer, you get paid a lot of money, if you're well known, to write something. What you write becomes the property of the producer. The producer has the right to change it, take out characters, change words, do whatever the producer wants to do with it. The director has the same power in films. Film is primarily a director's power medium. Television is primarily a producer's power medium. And the theater, more than any other medium, is a writer's medium, because here the writer has the control of the casting. You cannot have someone in the cast that the writer doesn't approve of. You cannot have a director that the writer doesn't approve of. This exists only in the theater and no place else. And it's a question of using your power and working with other people in the theater who also have that power, because the director has the same approvals. And the producer doesn't have to hire anyone he doesn't want to hire.
Well, while this is in the contract, in actuality, it doesn't always work that way.
It doesn't work that way, particularly on Broadway.
Enforceability is another matter.
I mean, I'll tell you a very quick story. When the boyfriend came over here from England, Sandy Wilson, I happened to meet him in England, so he told me, he called me one day and he said, the producers have barred me from the theater and they're ruining the show. And so he said, what can I do? So I said, well, I'll find out. So I called a lawyer I know named Bob Montgomery, and then Bob Montgomery felt that he couldn't handle it because he was representing somebody else that was involved. So I finally got him a lawyer who was not involved with anyone connected with the show, which took some doing. And this lawyer considered the possibility of suing the producers. And they had a meeting, and the producers, who were very tough-minded, said, yes, you can stop the production of this play, but if you do, he said, I am going to sue you for the entire amount of money that we have invested in this show so far, and if you're willing to take that chance, then go ahead and sue me. Well, here was this fellow here from England. He didn't have a great deal of money. He did not want to risk in a court in another country a possible judgment which would impoverish him for the rest of his life. So he decided not to sue.
Obviously he had no Dramatists Guild contract.
Yes, he did.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Because very often British playwrights don't.
They're not using the Dramatists Guild contract today in an awful lot of shows. PAP does not use it. The American Place does not use it. NEC does not use it. Many producers on Broadway do not use it. They draw up a special. Well, I have.
No,
I've
never.
signed several plays
Never.
that. Well, Robeson, I did not have a Dramatists Guild contract.
Well, the Dramatists Guild is not a recognized labor organization. It doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement with any producers or any theaters. It's recognized tacitly, but there is no agreement.
But even playwrights who do have a Dramatists Guild contract have been known to feel that the pressure is on them to please a producer, director, and that they're letting down the side if they don't make the changes that everybody is so eager for them to make.
Well, it's a collaborative
It's
method.
not a collaborative thing.
Getting a show on is collaborative.
Yeah,
not
the playwriting,
writing a play,
the
but
playwriting
getting a
is
show
not.
on
The text
collaborative.
is not. And this it goes to the heart of the problem. The text is not open to be collaborated by the director or the producer or the star.
Right.
You see, and we would be better off, because when that play opens and the critics come there, I have yet to find a director or a producer who is willing to stick his name on the program and say, I made the writer change this section of the play. See, they don't do that. The writer is held accountable for that. And they all know very well how it should be done. The famous case, if I may cite it, Audrey, was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where supposedly Williams was made to write a different ending because Kazan wanted one.
He was persuaded. He was persuaded.
Yeah, and if you go back and read Eric Bentley, in the 50s when he wrote, I think, In Search of Theater, one of his books, and I have no great brief for Bentley since he attacked Robeson, but he did make the point that sooner or later he felt that American playwrights were going to get to the point that they could not write a play by themselves because of this thing of the director becoming the co-author of the play.
Audrey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Kazan has always claimed that all that he really does when he works with a playwright is to try to push the playwright into writing something that is more truly his and his and reflects his personality than the playwright himself might otherwise be willing to put on paper.
He's manipulating the playwright.
May I at this point say that, please, on Cat, I think Gadge did want a third act, and Williams didn't. He wanted changes. Williams made the changes. Now, again, it's America. He didn't have to do this, Mr. Williams, and particularly Mr. Williams was an established playwright. But I'm afraid he favored Mr. Kazan. And when the book was finally published, if you ever look at it, you will find both versions, because Tennessee insisted that his original last act be there. And to make this a more interesting point, when this play was finally done in England, they used the other text, the one that Williams favored, and the play, for some reason, did not succeed. Now, maybe it wouldn't have succeeded anyway, because the London audience and American playwrights, there's a very great difference in opinions. But again, all I have to say is, that it is a free country, and Williams didn't have to do this, but because of his feeling for Kazan, because they had worked together previously, he did it. But this is an unusual circumstance, and I've never had this since.
Well, Tennessee told me that what happened was that in Camino Rio, he had a failure of a play that he thought very highly of and hoped very much from, and that he had a desperate need to have his next play successful, and therefore that he felt that Kazan had a better...
but also they had a very good relationship.
Yes.
I mean, they were not enemies.
And they worked together after that.
That's right, that's right.
What should the director do in a play?
Direct the play.
Yeah.
Direct the play and leave the text alone. If he agrees to direct that play when he reads it, I think he should leave the play alone. And I think that, he can read, but I think this whole thing of his demanding rewrites, there are some directors who come to you demanding rewrites immediately before he's read the play thoroughly, because he wants to make his contribution to the play. And I'm not so sure that it is wrong for a certain section of a play not to work. I'm not sure that that's wrong. That may be part of the organic structure of the play.
Ernest?
I agree with that, by the way. No one says that everybody has to like every shingle on a house, and I think that that's very true. And I think it's the charm of some plays that the scene might stink, but it fits somehow. It's part of the whole process. The other thing I wanted to add was directors are not the only enemy, as it were. There are those people known as actors too. And, actors.
They have ideas too.
I don't know how it was in the early '50s when the theater seemed to be so exciting and there were so many great plays around.
There was McCarthy.
Right, that kept them down.
Yeah, that kept them down.
But what happens now, and I think television is very much to blame for this, and I also must say that I have been guilty of it as an actor. If an actor works on a soap or on a series in California, there's a certain amount of liberty given to an actor to say, well, this line doesn't really work. I've got some rewrites for you here. And it's accepted and encouraged, particularly on soap operas. And I think that there's a tendency to let that bleed over into the theater, which is bad and wrong, because every line, every one-word sentence should be tried and listened to, and the playwright should make the decision if it works or not. Of course, the best way to know is to see it in a production with an audience and to be able to feel it with the audience. But I would encourage all of you to not listen to an actor whether his name is Scott or Schmo, because you know, you wrote the line, and I had an experience working with my play with an actress who's very well respected, and I love her. I think she's a wonderful actress, and yet several times she said to me about her character, she said, I wouldn't say that. But she wasn't the character. I had written the character, and I didn't write the actress. And there's a very big tendency to do that. And also, I heard one of my actors say, which I think is really special, playwrights never know what they've written.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a point of view that actors have, and it's wonderful. It's like put this guy in a room and let him come out in a few months, and we'll tell him what he did. And
we're going to go to questions now, so if you go, those who want to ask questions will go to the microphones. I have a personal question. You want to say something?
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, after listening, I've learned a lot from listening to this panel today, and I still feel something. I think it's very nice to be basking in these lights, but the real terror is working, sitting in a room which is not always so light and bright, sitting with a great deal of pain, life pain, translating that pain into work. You don't think about cabbages, directors, or anything else. The real experience is the damn thing that happens in your head, in your interior life, and between you, and I happen to write with a typewriter, unfortunately. I think sometimes it's easier with a pen or pencil. And I think the rest of it is to some extent a lottery. Some of it is genetic. There's nothing you can do if you happen to be too emotional to think clearly. Some of it is, yes, anatomy is destiny, and gender does have something to do with your experience in life. And I think the truth of the matter is, if you're a playwright, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's as much of a curse as a blessing, and you're going to fight the rest of your days, and if you want to do that, then stay in the theater. And if you don't want to do it, good, because then I have more chance to get my plays on.
Before we go to the questions, I have one personal question, infuriating question for you, David. If, in my opinion, the title GR Point may have great meaning to you, because that's what the place was called where the play takes place, but to somebody who is picking their show to see this afternoon, it doesn't seem to me to be a particularly marketable marketplace kind of title. And if I had been your producer, I would have been tempted to say to you, is it possible for you to give some other title to this play which would mean more to the person who is contemplating buying a ticket?
Well, I went through the experience when we were doing the show at the Center Stage in Baltimore this past winter. I went through a title crisis, which was basically promoted by my director, and justly so, because there is some legitimate question about whether GR Point means anything to anybody. And I came up with another title, which I will not reveal. I had an interview with the Baltimore Sun. I announced the title change to him. I gave him the scoop, in-process play, changes title in Baltimore. And the theater mimeoed up inserts for the programs announcing the title change and the author's very brief explanation of why. And then, at 2 o'clock in the morning, before the Baltimore Sun was to go to press the next morning with the story, I changed my mind and stuck with my original title. I don't really know why, except that there is no other metaphor for the experience of my play that I have come across so far. It might be better to spell out Graves registration, but frankly, I think Graves registration would drive people away, and GR is merely obscure. But it's not really obscure if you, then the other part of it comes in. Then something called promotion comes in, so that the audience out there has an understanding of what the title does mean.
You have to write your own titles. I'm sorry, and they all stink. Every title is bad in someone's mind. And if I wrote a play 5 years ago and called it, or 10 years ago and called it Equus, someone would have told me I was nuts. Right. And my play is a terrible title in most people's mind, On Golden Pond. Well, it happens that the play takes place on Golden Pond, and I rather thought it was fitting. But other people have wanted me to change it. And as recently as last week, I got into a long-distance conversation on my phone bill with one of my producers, who's a lovely, sweet movie star, and wanted me to change the name of my play, and I'm all for it. It seemed a bit late in the day, and I mentioned that to her in passing, but she thought we could take a notice out in Variety, and probably we could. But then, this many months later, and I'm not telling the tales behind her back because I think it's a wonderful story, she wanted me to change On Golden Pond from On Golden Pond to a variety of titles such as Love is for Every Day, or Spring Summer, or Indian Summer. But my favorite, and she was sincere in saying this, that we should call it To Rent a Boy. Now, she's not totally off kilter here, because there is a line in my play about renting. I should have rented a 13-year-old boy years ago, referring to the old woman talking to the old man and the pleasure he's gotten out of having a young boy around. But I cannot say for sure we wouldn't attract a certain audience, but
Apollo.
you got to write your titles and just stick with them. That's all.
It would have changed the focus to that character. Yes, go ahead.
That point is very Vietnam, and
Yes,
it's also mysterious.
One hears a lot these days about concept, and this word has just run all over.
Can't hear you.
I guess it's not. It's on. Oh, one hears a lot today about the word concept and how it applies in the theater. My question is to the authors. By the time your plays got to the stage, was it the same concept that perhaps you started with, or by the time it had been gone through the director and the designers and all these other folks and the actors, had it so completely changed, or had it not changed at all? I'm just curious.
In my case, there were always changes. Concept, I guess, my concept never changed, but then again, we're dealing with the convergence of concepts. The theater is a community. It's not one person's idea. In my opinion, all those talents working together should make a better than ordinary life experience. It doesn't always work that way. All I can tell you is concept is one of those words that doesn't motivate me. Go ahead.
Is anybody turned on by the word concept?
I think it's it's mostly a production thing. I don't think writers write from concept, at least I don't. If I'm directing, then I try to get a concept in which to put the play on. It's a scheme. Yeah. And I think it has much more to do with production than the process of writing the play.
Question over here.
I came here expecting to hear more about technique, and I've heard all about your politics. Does anybody have a special technique for writing? Any special one?
Well, I think that's a very
take for
individual
myself?
thing. Everybody writes differently. Everybody approaches a play differently. David, you want to say something?
Well, I mean, I think it's as simple and as complicated as that. I've actually, prior to the Broadway production of my play, which is my first play, I was actually hired to teach a playwriting workshop last year, which I enjoyed immensely, and it was actually a good time for me and for the students. And all I really did was talk about my own individual process. I just talked about what I liked and what I disliked, and tried to suggest to my students that they find their own way. It's not possible for any of us to lay our own private method on any of you, because it isn't going to work for you anyway. You can look around and talk to writers about their process, but you have to make the selections for yourself and discover your own techniques along the way, I think.
I have one quibble on that, David. I think that everyone should keep notebooks. That's my feeling. I think that writers very often expect to sit down at a typewriter or with a blank piece of paper and write the play. I think they have to write from their notes. That's like the clay for a sculptor. You must have your own resource material, your own reference work. I think that's what I would advise every writer, to keep a constant notebook.
Over here.
I have a question for Miss Wood. What is the best way to market a television play?
I am afraid that you will need somebody to represent you, because I think that if you do an original television script and you don't have an agent, I'm very doubtful that anybody would even read it for you because they're so frightened of lawsuits. I think you'd have to get an agent to do this for you, or maybe an attorney, but I think ideally an agent. Do you concur?
Yes, I do.
I don't think...
Yes. We have a question from over here.
I have two questions, if you'll indulge me. For Ms. Wood, do agents look favorably on multiple submissions, and would you prefer queries about work before we submit our material to you? And for Myrna Lamb, I would like to know how she makes the jump from the book of her work to the musical collaboration, unless she writes the music.
You're first.
Well, ideally, first of all, if you're really looking for an agent, you should not make multiple submissions. When somebody wrote a letter the other day and said they had somebody in California who might be interested in the picture rights of this particular play, which I'd never seen, and I had to write back and say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but when you clear it finally, and if you still wish to have somebody look at it, let me know. But don't write 12 agents, because we're all too busy, and again, I know it's a long, drawn-out process, but I wouldn't dare read anything if somebody else if I had a competitor reading it. We just can't work that way. And what was your other question? Well, yes, you do make, when you go out, are you talking about when you really submit a play for the first time?
Yes.
Well, you can, unlike fiction, if you're writing a novel, as perhaps you know, still, you can only make one submission at a time to a publisher. But in terms of the theater, if you were mad enough, as Mr. Harris said, to have 100 copies go out, you could do it. But in my opinion, it's impractical. And there aren't 100 people in the theater who I treasure or respect. But what I do is I take a script and I try at the beginning to arrive at the people most likely to see and appreciate this script. And if 6 scripts go out at a time, it's a great deal. And I'm not fooling with you on this because it's very difficult with this present group of people to even arrive at 6 people. But again, it's a very individual business. Sometimes you send it first to a star. Sometimes you might send it, forgive me, to a director. It all depends on the quality of the script and what it's saying and where you think it will best fit. Does that answer your question
Yes,
at all?
but I was asking, do you prefer a query about the material before we send the manuscript to you?
Yes, I do. I like very much to get a letter in which one indicates perhaps what this is about and also something about one's background. Because I have a one-liner I've been pulling lately, and I mean it. And the line is, there are more playwrights than people.
God, yes.
I just want to add something to that. I asked my agent that question on my way over here because I think it's a good question, and obviously it's very pertinent. My agent said he gets 5 submissions a day on an average. Out of 2,000 scripts, he might read 200, and out of 200, he might accept 1 client. And there are things that turn agents off, and I'm sure that Audrey would
Yes.
agree with me. Agents don't like to get packages in the mail that are unsolicited. They like to get a letter first saying who you are, and they like the letters to be written in English and clear and
typed, if possible.
and typed. They like them to be, if you're intelligent and you write intelligent scripts, I suggest writing an intelligent letter first. Because if you write a bad letter, then nobody's going to want to talk about it. Don't just send bulk packages to an agent because I don't mean to sound glib, but he really doesn't have time or the interest. And
Very often they go right back there.
Yes, they do. Right.
Unread.
Which is why, brings us to musical theater. I write the idea, the synopsis. From the synopsis, I write material which is musical. Not rhythm, not already in form, unless I have some inspiration, but material which is specifically musical. I work with a composer whose work I adore, although I do not always adore the composer. And
Is it rhyme material? Or?
Much of it is rhymed.
Yeah.
Much of it
I mean,
is
it's a song
rhymed.
idea that is actually fleshed out.
I'm afraid so. And then the composer, inspired by my material, I'm the only one who does this, so it's not going to help you, writes the music, and then I adjust. This is the worst job on earth. I adjust my beautiful material to the beautiful music, and the music always wins. And it has to be, for stress and accent and clarity and ease of singing and so forth. And I pride myself that I have developed a marvelous craft, and I'm very pleased with myself. Does that help you? Yes. Good.
Yeah. I was wondering if any of you had ever produced or played the leading role in or directed one of your own works, and whether that was positive for the work or whether that proved disastrous or whatever. I mean, there's a notion that you should stay as far away from any of those things as possible, even if you're talented in another area on your own work.
Anyone produced it? You've directed your own work, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's Cunard started by directors, that the writer cannot direct his own play. I think he can direct his own play if he knows how to direct. I don't think that just because you've written the play, you can direct a play. But if you know how to direct, then I see nothing wrong with a writer directing his own play. I think Albee has done that very successfully, particularly with the revival of Virginia Woolf.
Question here.
Good afternoon. I have 3 questions.
Okay, well, ask the first one and then ask the most important one.
Well, I'd like to ask, when you have a play and it's finished, and you're scared as hell to let it go, who can you consult with to let them view your play? That's question number 1. And question number 2 is, who determines if your play is good enough to be produced? And my third question is for Phillip. Where are the theater bars that you go to meet the producers?
Audrey, you want to answer that? I would think.
Do you want to answer that, Phillip, or just somebody else?
Well, you could, a good place to go to. Have you been to the Frank Silvera workshop?
No, I haven't.
On 125th Street. There is a, Guyland Thomas runs the Frank Silvera workshop. They read a lot of plays there. And it's a good place to start.
Well, I think St. Clement's also does play readings, because I went to one the other day, which is an off-Broadway theater.
Well, we had Gail Merrifield Papp here last year, and she said that they accept plays, and if they like the play, they give it a workshop reading, and then follow it up with a.
Except that at the Frank Silvera, you don't have to go through any procedure. Generally, if you go there, you go there 2 or 3 times for three or 4 sessions, and you get to know the people. It's very easy to get it read. I don't know the value of that, but
I think you can learn a lot from a reading.
Yes.
Even if it's a reading in your own living room with some friends of yours, it's very valuable to hear your own words out of somebody else's mouth.
Yeah. And even if they're not actors?
Well, yes, if you can't find a bunch of actors, I would say go ahead and use just people who you might expect at least could read clearly.
I think the hardest thing is to release a script. And I'm thinking of a story briefly. Jane Bowles, a very good writer, wrote her first play called In the Summer House, which I'm sure maybe happily some of you have read. And I took her to lunch one day, and one of her idiosyncrasies was she couldn't go in an elevator, so I had to get, I met her in the office, and I took her right in a restaurant, and she had this finished script in her hand, and the whole purpose of lunch was to give me the script. And we got to the end of the lunch, and I put my hand out, and she said, no, Audrey, a little more work I want to do. And she left with the script on her bosom, and I didn't have the play. And about 2 weeks passed, there was no word from her. And my husband called, at this period they were all living in a brownstone house. Oliver Smith was there.
In Brooklyn. Yeah. Brooklyn Heights.
And my husband said, what the hell happened to Bowles' script? Where is it? Whereupon Oliver said, Oh, he said, didn't Jane give it to Audrey? It's been sitting on the radiator for a week. In other words, she couldn't let it go. In other words, it's a terrible thing. No. To risk, yes, I got it. But to take something that close to you and hand it to someone else, it is no longer quite yours.
Hand it to somebody you trust to tell you the truth, no matter how painful it will be, whether it's a teacher or a friend, someone whose intelligence you respect to begin with, and somebody who hasn't lied to you lately.
But somebody who could tell you the truth gently, I hope.
Yes, but often, even though it's delivered, the truth is delivered gently, it may hurt quite a bit.
Once again, though, there are still going to be bad plays that will exist forever, or people will go on writing bad plays, and you might go to the wrong person. I mean, I don't mean to disagree, but if I don't like your play, it doesn't mean it's not good, because Henry Hewes might, and Audrey Wood might not, and Phillip might. And,
I didn't mean to suggest you should only go to one person. I went to a half a dozen at that stage of things, and was uniformly, roundly, not criticized, but a lot of it got put down and was very painful, but they were people whom I knew were not doing it for any other reason than to help me.
I learned a quick lesson, and I was working for the New York Times, and I wrote my first story for the Sunday Drama section. I showed it to Meyer Berger, who was their Pulitzer Prize writer, and he so gently showed me where I could work on this to make it better, and he said, he was very apologetic about doing so, but he said, I find there's no piece of writing that can't be improved. And I think that over the years I've found that to be true, that you think when you get to the end of a play or the end of an article that that's the most you can do with it, but there always is something that can be improved in.
But it's a short life.
Yeah.
I have a question and an idea. The first question is, have any of you ever collaborated with another playwright on a play?
No.
And the idea was, I knew of a playwright who wrote a grant. No one would do his play. It was so long and complicated, no one would do his play. Until he wrote a grant, and he got $30,000 from the National Endowment of the Humanities, and he had his play produced as a playwright. And since we were talking about politics, and since you're playwrights and I'm not, I thought it was an interesting idea. I don't know all the hell he had to go through, but it was an interesting idea. He had a lot of power when he had that money to do whatever he wanted.
Do you think he politicked his way into that grant, or do you think that he won the grant because of the quality of his work?
His quality of his work was good, and because he knew how to write a grant.
Did he ever get it produced?
He got it produced.
How did he get $30,000? The top is $7,500.
It's humanities.
Humanities, National Endowment for the Humanities. And it was done.
He in a school?
It was done at Trinity Square Repertory.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet
That's
I know
different.
what play that is.
Question over here.
I think this is probably a question primarily for Ms. Dalrymple, Ms. Wood, and for legal counsel. But after listening to the awesome nature of the conflict between the playwright and the rest of the collaborative group, I still feel as if I'm sort of at the end of Act Two, and I wonder if the three that I addressed myself to, and possibly any of the rest of you, particularly those of you who've been in musical comedy productions, might have anything further that you could say, either about contractual developments, which might be helpful, or organizational or structural suggestions that would resolve this, really what sounds like, and what I've experienced also, as a hellish conflict.
I will say that if you get into musical comedy, that the problems are multiplied by about 10.
Yeah.
Because you have that many more people that also have control and approvals, and you have to agree en masse as to what you do at each step. And everyone's got something to say, and it becomes hellish and very difficult, and frequently people are fired from the place.
I would be particularly interested if you thought there were any contractual evolutions that might lie in the future which would aid this process. I was interested in what Ms. Wood said. I think that perhaps the fact that there is so much new money and so little experience is one of the big problems.
All the producers want you to do is get them all the power, and the directors want you to get them all the power, and the playwrights want all the power for themselves, and it just can't work that way. So that contractually, it would probably will stay where it is for a long time, with everyone having something to say and everyone having approval.
I'm sorry to have to
Susan,
say,
can we get...
I have the power to end these seminars.
I'm sorry,
And I wish that they could go
I'd
on
like to
because there's
have your
always so much more that has to be said and so many more questions. And so as soon as we finish this, we'll stay, I hope, for a few more minutes of questions by the audience and answers by our panelists. But these are seminars that are being brought to you from Cumbin, the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and they are being brought by the American Theater Wing. And I think that, as all of our seminars have shown, a crossover in theater is terribly important, and everyone on here has done very many things, a great deal of things in the theater, other than the playwriting or the directing or the acting. And part of the purpose of the seminars is to bring this experience to you and to share it with you. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you to everyone, thanks to everybody on the staff of City University for making these possible to us.
Now, do we have time for another couple of questions?
I don't think so. We have